Daniels walked through the bustling streets of Mexico City, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin and the weight of the envelope she was clutching tightly against her chest. At just 20 years old, she had already lived a life full of hardship, struggling every day to survive on the streets. But today, everything could change. She had found something that could transform her life. She approached Arthur's imposing mansion, her heart pounding. She stopped in front of the massive door and, with determination, rang the doorbell. The door opened slowly, revealing a tall, stern woman. The housekeeper looked her up and down with disdain. "What do you want?" the woman asked coldly, making it clear that Daniel's presence was not welcome. Daniel stood firm and responded with resolve. "I need to speak with Mr. Arthur. I have important documents for him." The housekeeper let out a dry, sarcastic laugh, shaking her head. "Mr. Arthur doesn't receive beggars. If you want money, go find a job," she said, beginning to close the door in Daniel's face. Quickly, Daniels placed her foot in the door, preventing it from closing. "I won't leave until I deliver these documents. They're very important," she insisted with urgency and determination. The housekeeper paused for a moment, hesitating. There was something about Daniels's firmness that made her reconsider. With an irritated and disdainful look, she left the door ajar and disappeared down the hallway. Daniels waited, her heart pounding as she tried to control her anxiety. Minutes later, a tall, elegant man appeared. Arthur, the owner of the mansion. He looked extremely irritated at having been interrupted. "What's going on here?" Arthur asked impatiently, eyeing Daniels with suspicion. "I found your documents," Daniels said, extending the envelope. Arthur looked at her skeptically before taking the envelope. He opened it and quickly scanned the contents. His eyes widened as he recognized the documents. "Where did you find this?" he asked suspiciously. "That doesn't matter now. What matters is that I came to return them to you," Daniels replied, trying to stay calm despite Arthur's intimidating gaze. Arthur narrowed his eyes, clearly unconvinced. "My documents couldn't end up in the hands of someone like you. You must be lying. If you're after money, go find a job. I don't have time for this," he said, starting to close the door again. "I won't leave until you take these documents," Daniels exclaimed, standing firm. "These documents are important and you need them." Arthur paused, his hand still on the door. He stared at her for a long moment, evaluating her seriousness and determination. Something in her tone and intense gaze made him reconsider. Then Daniels pulled out some of the papers from the folder, and Arthur saw she was telling the truth. "Fine," he finally said, opening the door again. "Come in, let's talk more about this." Daniels followed him through the vast mansion, feeling out of place among the luxury and opulence that surrounded her. The hallways were decorated with expensive art and luxurious furniture, creating an overwhelming contrast with her everyday reality. Arthur led her to an elegantly decorated room and pointed to a couch for her to sit. "Sit," he said distrustfully. "Explain exactly how you found these documents and why you're here." Daniels took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. She knew this was a crucial moment and needed to be clear and honest. "I was walking down the street when I found these documents in a pile of trash. I recognized your name and address, so I decided to bring them here. I knew they were important, and I thought I should return them to you personally," she explained, hoping he would believe her story. Arthur remained silent for a moment, processing her words. He still seemed skeptical, but the sincerity in Daniels's eyes began to touch him. He knew those documents were crucial, and the urgency in her voice made him reconsider his initial stance. "Very well," he said cautiously. "I'll verify all the documents, but you must understand that I can't simply trust someone who appears out of nowhere. I will investigate this." Daniels nodded, understanding his mistrust. "Thank you," she said gratefully. "I just wanted to do the right thing." Arthur observed her for a moment longer, his expression softening slightly. "We'll see," he replied, still skeptical but a little more open. Arthur carefully examined the documents, his expression shifting between relief and surprise. They were as important as Daniels had said, and he knew recovering them was vital. After a few minutes of silence, he stood up. He looked at Daniels, who was sitting on the couch, watching him expectantly. "These documents are mine. You did the right thing by bringing them here," he said, his tone softer but still formal. "I knew they were important," Daniels replied, her eyes shining with a mix of relief and apprehension. Arthur set the documents aside and approached a nearby table. He pulled out his wallet and began writing a check. "How much do you want for finding and returning these documents?" he asked, writing. Daniels frowned and shook her head firmly. "I don't want money. That's not what I'm asking for." Arthur stopped writing and looked at her, clearly confused. "Then what do you want?" he asked, genuinely curious. She sighed deeply, knowing what she was about to ask was unusual and risky. "I want you to treat me like a daughter for a week," she said, with firmness but also a vulnerability she couldn't hide. Arthur stood still for a moment, her words hanging in the air. Slowly he lowered his pen and fully looked at her, his eyes widening in surprise. "What?" he asked, still trying to process the request. "I've never had a real family. I want to know what it's like to have a father, even if it's just for a week," Daniels explained, being sincere, with a tone of desperation. Arthur took a deep breath, trying to understand the motivation behind her request. Arthur had expected her to ask for money or something material, but this was completely unexpected. Something in her vulnerability touched a part of him he thought was dormant. He had lost his father when he was young and knew how the absence of a father could shape someone. "Are you asking me to treat you as a daughter for a week?" he repeated, still not quite believing it. "Yes, that's all I want. I don't want money or anything material. I just want to know what it feels like to have a father, even if it's for a short time," Daniels replied, her eyes fixed on Arthur. Arthur remained silent, reflecting on her request. The idea seemed absurd, but at the same time there was something deeply human and touching about it. He had never thought of having children, especially after the death of his father, but now this young woman was standing in front of him, asking for something so simple and yet so profound. "All right," he finally said. "I accept your request. For 1 week I will treat you as my daughter." Daniels felt a wave of relief and excitement. She couldn't believe he had agreed. "Thank you, Mr. Arthur. This means so much to me," she said, with evident gratitude in every word. "Just Arthur is fine," he corrected with a slight smile. "Here's what we'll do. We'll start tomorrow. You can stay here in the mansion for the week. I'll have a room prepared for you." "Thank you, Arthur," Daniels said, smiling for the first time since she arrived. Arthur stood up and rang the bell. The housekeeper returned, still with a severe expression, but now a bit more curious. "Prepare a room for Daniels. She will stay with us for a week," Arthur instructed. The housekeeper raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Daniels followed her down the long hallway, feeling relieved, but also nervous about what was to come. Arthur watched as they disappeared down the hall, still reflecting on the unusual request. Later, Arthur's wife Evelyn arrived home with several shopping bags, pleased with her new purchases. She was a woman accustomed to luxury and comfort, and her afternoon shopping trips were a routine she liked to maintain. When she entered the mansion, she saw Arthur sitting on the living room sofa, a serious expression on his face which stopped her in her tracks. Something was wrong. "Arthur, what happened?" Evelyn asked, placing her bags on the floor and walking toward him. Arthur looked at her, taking a deep breath before responding. "We need to talk, Evelyn. Something unexpected happened today," he said, gesturing for her to sit beside him. Evelyn felt a chill down her spine, but she sat down looking directly at her husband. "What is it?" she asked apprehensively. "A young woman named Daniels came here today. She found some important documents I had lost. Instead of asking for money, she made a rather unusual request," Arthur began, watching Evelyn's reaction. "What kind of request?" Evelyn asked, her tone full of distrust. "She asked us to treat her like a daughter for a week," Arthur said, waiting for her response. Evelyn's eyes widened, clearly surprised and uncomfortable. "And you accepted that?" she exclaimed in disbelief. "Yes, I did. I know it's unusual, but there's something about her that moved me. She has a difficult story and I think we can do this for her, Arthur explained, trying to calm his wife. And where is she now? Evelyn asked, still unconvinced. In the guest room. She'll be staying with us this week. Please, Evelyn, try to understand. I think it's the right thing to do, Arthur said, taking her hand. Evelyn sighed, shaking her head. All right, I don't like it, but I'll try, she replied reluctantly. Later, during dinner, Daniels timidly descended the stairs, finding Arthur and Evelyn already seated at the table. Evelyn looked her up and down, still distrustful. Arthur smiled at Daniels, motioning for her to sit. Daniels, this is my wife, Evelyn, Arthur introduced. Nice to meet you, ma'am, Daniels said, trying to hide her nervousness. Pleasure, Daniels. Arthur has told me about your request. I hope you understand that this is very unusual for us, Evelyn said, her tone cold. I understand, ma'am, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity, Daniels replied humbly. Tell us more about yourself, Daniels. How did you get here? Evelyn asked more softly but still full of distrust. Daniels took a deep breath before beginning to speak. I grew up on the streets. I don't have a family. I lost my mother when I was very young and never met my father. Since then, I've survived on my own, doing whatever I could to get by, Daniels explained, her voice steady but with a touch of sadness. Evelyn listened intently, observing her closely, trying to figure out the young woman sitting before her. Arthur, on the other hand, felt growing empathy for Daniel's story. It must have been very hard for you, Arthur said softly. Yes, sir, but I learned to be strong. Every day was a new struggle. When I found your documents, I knew they were important, and I wanted to do the right thing, Daniels continued honestly. And what do you hope to gain from this? Evelyn asked, still trying to understand Daniel's motivations. I don't want money, ma'am. I just want to know what it feels like to have a family, even if it's just for a short time. It's something I've never had and I've always longed for, Daniels explained, her vulnerability touching something in Evelyn despite her initial resistance. Arthur glanced at Evelyn, hoping she could also sense Daniels's sincerity. Slowly, he saw Evelyn's expression soften slightly. Well, Daniels, this week will be a trial for all of us. I hope we can learn something from this experience, Evelyn said, trying to show a bit of understanding. Thank you, ma'am. I promise I'll do my best not to disappoint you, Daniels said, with a slight smile of gratitude on her face. The dinner continued with lighter conversations, but Daniels's presence brought a new dynamic to the table. The days at Arthur's house started off tense, but little by little things began to take a different turn. Arthur made an effort to include Daniels in the household routines, introducing her to the staff and showing her around the mansion. Though Daniels was outside her familiar environment, she began to feel a bit more comfortable, although Evelyn's constant presence and judgmental looks were a reminder that she was still a stranger in this place. As the days passed quickly, the bond between Arthur and Daniels deepened. Arthur began to see her as more than just a lost young woman. He saw potential and determination in her. On her part, Daniels started to feel warmth and acceptance that she had never experienced before. However, not everyone was willing to accept Daniels so easily. Evelyn, in particular, was a constant presence of disapproval. During a family dinner, where some of Arthur's relatives came to visit, the resistance became evident. The glances and whispers didn't go unnoticed by Daniels. So, Daniels, are you a friend of Arthur's? One of the aunts asked in a condescending tone. She's with us for a week, helping with some personal matters, Arthur quickly responded, trying to steer the conversation away. I see, and where are you from, dear? The aunt insisted, clearly suspicious. I grew up on the streets without a family. Arthur and Evelyn have given me the opportunity to experience what it's like to have a home, even if just for a short time, Daniels responded, maintaining her composure. The glances and whispers continued, but Daniels stood firm. She knew this opportunity was unique and wouldn't let the disapproval of others affect her. Noticing Daniels' discomfort, Arthur tried to involve her more in family activities. One day, they spent the afternoon cooking together in the mansion's kitchen. Do you like cooking, Daniels? Arthur asked as he chopped some vegetables. I never had many opportunities to cook, but it's always seemed interesting to me. It's something I never imagined doing, Daniels responded with a smile. Let's make something simple but special. It's a way for us to get to know each other better, and also for you to experience a bit of what family life is like, Arthur said encouragingly. The days flew by, and the connection between Arthur and Daniels grew stronger. Arthur started to see her as the daughter he never had, and Daniels began to feel the warmth of a family, something she had never experienced before. However, not everyone was happy with this new dynamic. Evelyn, in particular, didn't view the growing closeness between Arthur and Daniels favorably. The week that had started with hope and opportunity soon turned into an emotional battle in Arthur's mansion. From the first meeting between Evelyn and Daniels, there had been a palpable tension in the air. Evelyn couldn't hide her discomfort with Daniels's presence and the way Arthur treated her. Evelyn began to suspect Daniels's intentions and made no effort to conceal her disdain. The situation worsened on a Thursday morning when Daniels entered the kitchen to prepare breakfast, something Arthur had suggested to help her feel more at home. "What are you doing here?" Evelyn asked sarcastically. "Arthur suggested I could make breakfast today," Daniels responded, trying to stay calm. "Of course he did," Evelyn replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Do you think you're going to win everyone over here with your fake kindness?" Daniels was taken aback by the accusation and tried to defend herself. "I'm not trying to win anyone over, Evelyn. I just want to know what it's like to have a family, even if just for a little while." "Family? Do you really think you can just come into our lives and become part of it?" "Don't be naive," Evelyn snapped, crossing her arms. "I know it's hard to understand, but I'm not here to manipulate anyone. I just want to feel what it's like to have a home," Daniels insisted, feeling tears threatening to come. Evelyn scoffed, incredulous. "I can see right through you. You're using that sob story to gain Arthur's sympathy, and he's falling for it." "That's not true," Daniels replied, raising her voice for the first time, frustrated. "All I asked for was a chance to feel what it's like to have a father and a family. I don't want anything more than that." The tension was almost palpable, and Evelyn stepped closer to Daniels, her face only inches from hers. "I don't trust you, Daniels, and I'll make sure Arthur sees who you really are," Evelyn whispered, before turning and leaving the kitchen. Daniels stood there, breathing deeply to calm herself. She knew this would be difficult, but she hadn't expected it to be so painful. She wanted to give up, but Arthur's promise to treat her as a daughter for a week kept her strong. She couldn't let Evelyn ruin this one chance to experience something she had always longed for. Later that day, Arthur noticed that something was wrong. Daniels was quiet and seemed distant. He found her sitting in the garden, staring at the horizon with a sad expression. "Are you all right, Daniels?" Arthur asked, sitting beside her. "No, Arthur, I'm not all right," Daniels replied, looking at him with teary eyes. "Evelyn doesn't believe me. She thinks I'm here to manipulate you." Arthur sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I knew this would be hard for her, but I didn't expect it to reach this point. I'm going to talk to Evelyn. This can't go on," Arthur promised, concerned. "Thank you, Arthur, but I don't want to cause trouble between the two of you. All I wanted was just a little bit of family love," Daniels said sadly. Arthur placed a comforting hand on Daniels' shoulder, trying to reassure her. "I understand, Daniels, and I'll do everything I can to make sure you have that experience. I promise we'll figure this out," he said, determined. That evening, during dinner, the tension was palpable once again. Evelyn glared at Daniels with disdain while Arthur tried to maintain peace. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore and decided to confront the situation. "Evelyn, we need to talk about this. We can't keep going like this," Arthur said firmly. "Talk about what, Arthur?" "About how this girl is deceiving you," Evelyn responded, crossing her arms. "Daniels is not here to deceive us. She just wants to experience what it's like to have a family. Please try to understand that," Arthur pleaded, looking deeply into her eyes. "Understand? You want me to understand that you brought a stranger into our home and are treating her like a daughter? This is absurd," Evelyn responded angrily. "Evelyn, I know this is hard for you, but we need to be more understanding. Daniels has no one. This is her first time experiencing anything like a home, Arthur said, trying to calm his wife. Evelyn glanced at Daniels, who remained silent and visibly uncomfortable. If you want to help her so much, fine. But I'm not going to pretend I'm happy about it, Evelyn said, standing up from the table and leaving the dining room. Arthur sighed, feeling helpless. He looked at Daniels, who had her head down, trying to hold back tears. Everything will be all right, Daniels. I promise, Arthur said, trying to comfort her. Thank you, Arthur. I just hope this doesn't cause you more problems, Daniels replied, her voice trembling. That night was long and difficult for everyone in the mansion. The tension between Daniels and Evelyn seemed insurmountable, and Arthur knew he would need all his patience and understanding to help resolve this situation. He was determined to keep his promise to Daniels, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. Thus, the week that began with hope and opportunity was turning into an emotional battle, and no one knew how it would end. As Arthur started to fulfill his promise of treating Daniels like a daughter, the young woman began to take advantage of the new experiences. However, the peace was shaken when, while walking through the city streets, she ran into an old acquaintance, Leandro. "Leandro? Is that you?" Daniels asked, her eyes widening in surprise. "Yeah, it's me, Daniels. How are you?" Leandro replied, smiling. "It looks like your life has taken a turn." "It's a long story. I found a folder with important documents and decided to return them to the owner. That allowed me to stay with him for a week," Daniels explained. Impressed, Leandro asked for more details. Daniels took a photo of Arthur and Evelyn from her pocket, showing her friend who the people involved were. "This is Arthur, the owner of the documents, and this is Evelyn, his wife," Daniels said, pointing to the picture. Leandro frowned when he saw Evelyn's photo. "I know that woman. I saw her throwing something into a dumpster on a street a few nights ago. It seemed strange because it was nighttime and that street was pretty isolated. She doesn't live nearby," Leandro revealed, surprised. Daniels felt a chill run down her spine upon hearing Leandro's words. Could it be possible that Evelyn had something to do with the disappearance of the documents? She decided that she needed to tell Arthur about this discovery. That night, Daniels approached Arthur while he was in his study, reviewing some papers. "Arthur, I need to talk to you. It's important," Daniels said seriously. Arthur observed her for a moment longer, his expression softening slightly. "We'll see," he replied, still skeptical, but a little more open. Arthur carefully examined the documents, his expression shifting between relief and surprise. They were as important as Daniels had said, and he knew recovering them was vital. After a few minutes of silence, he stood up. He looked at Daniels, who was sitting on the couch, watching him expectantly. "These documents are mine. You did the right thing by bringing them here," he said, his tone softer but still formal. "I knew they were important," Daniels replied, her eyes shining with a mix of relief and apprehension. Arthur set the documents aside and approached a nearby table. He pulled out his wallet and began writing a check. "How much do you want for finding and returning these documents?" he asked, writing. Daniels frowned and shook her head firmly. "I don't want money. That's not what I'm asking for." Arthur stopped writing and looked at her, clearly confused. "Then what do you want?" he asked, genuinely curious. She sighed deeply, knowing what she was about to ask was unusual and risky. "I want you to treat me like a daughter for a week," she said with firmness but also a vulnerability she couldn't hide. Arthur stood still for a moment, her words hanging in the air. Slowly he lowered his pen and fully looked at her, his eyes widening in surprise. "What?" he asked, still trying to process the request. "I've never had a real family. I want to know what it's like to have a father, even if it's just for a week," Daniels explained, being sincere, with a tone of desperation. Arthur took a deep breath, trying to understand the motivation behind her request. Arthur had expected her to ask for money, or something material, but this was completely unexpected. Something in her vulnerability touched a part of him he thought was dormant. He had lost his father when he was young, and knew how the absence of a father could shape someone. Are you asking me to treat you as a daughter for a week? He repeated, still not quite believing it. Yes, that's all I want. I don't want money or anything material. I just want to know what it feels like to have a father, even if it's for a short time, Daniels replied, her eyes fixed on Arthur. Arthur remained silent, reflecting on her request. The idea seemed absurd, but at the same time, there was something deeply human and touching about it. He had never thought of having children, especially after the death of his father. But now this young woman was standing in front of him, asking for something so simple and yet so profound. All right, he finally said. I accept your request. For 1 week, I will treat you as my daughter. Daniels felt a wave of relief and excitement. She couldn't believe he had agreed. Thank you, Mr. Arthur. This means so much to me, she said, with evident gratitude in every word. Just Arthur is fine, he corrected with a slight smile. Here's what we'll do. We'll start tomorrow. You can stay here in the mansion for the week. I'll have a room prepared for you. Thank you, Arthur, Daniels said, smiling for the first time since she arrived. Arthur stood up and rang the bell. The housekeeper returned, still with a severe expression, but now a bit more curious. Prepare a room for Daniels. She will stay with us for a week, Arthur instructed. The housekeeper raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Daniels followed her down the long hallway, feeling relieved but also nervous about what was to come. Arthur watched as they disappeared down the hall, still reflecting on the unusual request. Later, Arthur's wife, Evelyn, arrived home with several shopping bags, pleased with her new purchases. She was a woman accustomed to luxury and comfort, and her afternoon shopping trips were a routine she liked to maintain. When she entered the mansion, she saw Arthur sitting on the living room sofa, a serious expression on his face which stopped her in her tracks. Something was wrong. Javier, I need you to find a good detective, someone discreet and efficient, Arthur instructed quietly. Of course, sir. Is there a specific problem? Javier asked, curious. I'd prefer not to get into details right now. Just handle it as soon as possible, Arthur replied, ending the conversation. Meanwhile, Daniels tried to avoid Evelyn and the tensions in the house. She felt like an intruder, but was also determined to make the most of the week Arthur had promised her. The young woman knew she needed to remain calm and patient. Evelyn, for her part, was uneasy. She realized that her reaction the night before had raised suspicions. She needed to be more careful and find a way to get rid of Daniels before things worsened. Later that afternoon, the detective Arthur had hired arrived at the mansion. Arthur received him in his office, away from Evelyn's prying eyes. Detective Ricardo Belmont, I need you to investigate my wife, Evelyn. Something strange is happening, and I need the truth, Arthur said bluntly. Understood, sir. Is there any specific detail I should know? The detective asked, taking notes. Arthur hesitated for a moment, but knew he needed to be transparent to get results. Evelyn was accused of throwing away some important documents of mine. A friend of Daniel's, the young woman staying with us, said he saw a woman who resembled Evelyn dumping something in a trash bin on a remote street. I want you to review the security cameras in that area and confirm if that's true. Ricardo nodded, carefully noting the information. All right, sir. I'll analyze the cameras and follow that lead, he said, leaving the office with a calm determination. As Ricardo began his investigation, the tension in the mansion continued to grow. Evelyn did everything she could to avoid Daniels, while Arthur tried to keep the peace. He knew the truth was about to come out and feared the consequences. That night, before going to bed, Arthur reflected on his decision. He knew that the investigation could destroy his marriage, but the truth was more important. Safety and justice had to prevail. Tomorrow will begin a new chapter, Arthur thought as he closed his eyes, hoping that the truth, however painful, would bring peace back to his life. Detective Ricardo spent hours reviewing security footage and returned the next day with conclusive evidence. The images clearly showed Evelyn dumping the documents into a trash bin. Arthur, devastated by the betrayal, confronted Evelyn, who finally admitted to sabotaging him. With a broken heart, Arthur decided to end his marriage and say goodbye to Evelyn. From that moment on, Arthur and Daniels began to build a new life together, based on trust and mutual respect. Although the betrayal had been painful, both found unexpected solace in their new relationship. As the days passed, Daniels and Arthur grew closer, finding comfort in each other's company. Arthur had been deeply wounded by Evelyn's betrayal, but he found solace in the bond that was forming between him and Daniels. It was an unexpected relationship, but it gave him a sense of peace and purpose he hadn't felt in years. Daniels, on the other hand, had never imagined her life would take such a turn. She had spent most of her life struggling on the streets, with no one to lean on, and now she was living in a mansion with someone who genuinely cared about her. It was almost surreal, and while she was grateful for Arthur's kindness, she couldn't shake off the feeling that it might all disappear. Arthur knew that Daniels had experienced hardship, but he began to see her as much more than a girl who had faced challenges. He saw in her the determination and resilience of someone who had survived against all odds. It wasn't just pity that connected him to her now, it was admiration for her strength. "Daniels, I've been thinking," Arthur said one evening as they sat in the living room, enjoying a quiet moment after dinner. "You've shown me what it means to keep fighting even when things seem impossible. I've learned a lot from you in just a few days." Daniels looked at him, surprised. "From me? Arthur, I've learned so much from you. I never thought I could experience what it's like to have a family, even if it's just for a little while. You've given me more than I could ever ask for." Arthur smiled, but there was a seriousness in his eyes. "This week is coming to an end, and I don't want to just say goodbye and send you back to the life you had before. I'd like to help you find a way to move forward, to build a future." Daniels felt a lump in her throat. She had feared this moment, the end of their arrangement. But now Arthur was offering her something more, something she had never dared hope for. "Arthur, I don't know what to say," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't want to be a burden to you." "You're not a burden, Daniels. In fact, I think we can help each other. You've brought something into my life that I didn't realize I was missing. Maybe we can figure out how to continue this, how to be there for each other," Arthur said gently. Daniels nodded, trying to keep her emotions in check. She had never felt so understood, so cared for. It was a strange feeling for someone who had spent so much of her life alone, but it was one she didn't want to let go of. The next morning, Arthur made arrangements to help Daniels get back on her feet. He contacted some of his connections to explore opportunities for her, offering to support her in finding a stable job and a place to stay. He didn't want her to feel dependent on him, but he also didn't want her to go back to the harsh life she had known before. "Daniels, I've spoken to some people, and there are a few options for you," Arthur told her over breakfast. "You could stay here for a while longer, or if you'd prefer, we could find a place for you nearby and I can help you get settled with a job." Daniels looked at Arthur, her heart full of gratitude. "I never thought someone would go this far for me, Arthur. I'll never forget this. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time, I feel like it's full of possibilities." Arthur smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment he hadn't expected when Daniels first knocked on his door. He had started out as a man burdened by his own losses and betrayal, but now he saw a future that looked brighter, one where he and Daniels could move forward, not as strangers brought together by chance, but as two people who had found family in each other. As the final day of their week together came to a close, Arthur and Daniels stood on the balcony, looking out over the city. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the landscape. It felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. "I'll always remember this week," Daniels said softly. "No matter what happens next, I'll carry this with me forever." Arthur nodded, his heart full. "And so will I, Daniels. We've both come a long way, and I believe this is just the beginning for both of us." The sun dipped below the horizon, and for the first time in a long time, both Arthur and Daniels felt a sense of hope, a feeling that, despite everything they had been through, the future held something worth looking forward to.